Hello everybody, this is Dr. Christopher White, and in this presentation we're going to continue looking at plate tectonics. So in this video we're going to have a look at using drill core in order to date our oceanic crust, and we're also going to think about the formation of linear island chains. So let's begin by thinking about how we actually get our ages for the oceanic crust and how we can actually use that to calculate a rate of spreading. Well, we can see here's our oceanic crust and there's our divergent plate boundary. We can see our ridge, which obviously sits noticeably higher than the terrain either side. So new oceanic crust is being made here, and over time as new oceanic crust is made at the ridge, it pushes older oceanic crust laterally away. The standard model for a divergent plate boundary. Now, as you can see here we have our ship, and on our ship we have ourselves a drill rig, and that drill rig is going to drill down into the crust, and we are going to collect cores, so we're going to collect samples of the oceanic crust. Now, the first thing that we notice when we drill cores like this is that the further away we get from the spreading ridge, the thicker the layer of sediment is on top of the seafloor. Now, this obviously makes perfect sense. The older the piece of oceanic crust is, the longer it's had time to accumulate sediment on top of it. So essentially, as you can see, as we move away from the crust, the thickness of sediment on top of the oceanic crust gets greater. So the thickness increases as you move away from the spreading ridge. This is consistent with the crust getting older as we move laterally away from our spreading ridge. Now, in terms of the oceanic crust itself, we'll collect a sample of the volcanic rock. We can then of course date that, and that will give us a numerical age for the rock, and we can also study its paleomagnetism, so we can work out whether the Earth's magnetic field was normal or reversed. So we know how far from the ridge the sample was collected. We know the age of the sample because we found that in the lab, and so we know the distance. We know how long it took to get there, and so once again, distance over time gives us the rate of spreading. And the thing is though, is what we begin to see is that as we move away and we have these different cores, they will give different rates of spreading. So maybe this core here formed when the rate of spreading was very, very fast, then it slowed down, sped up, slowed down, sped up again maybe. And so what we see when we collect this data is we can see that the rate of spreading is not constant, it is variable. So the next source of data we can use to try and calculate the rate of plate movement are linear island chains. Now, linear island chains are different to island arcs. We know that island arcs are associated with plate boundaries, more accurately ocean-ocean convergent plate boundaries. We know they are also associated with features such as trenches on the seafloor and accretionary prisms. And we know that the islands themselves form a chain that has a rather distinctive curved shape to it, hence the name island arc. Now, in contrast, linear mountain chains do not typically form at plate boundaries. They often form away from plate boundaries. They are not associated with features like trenches or accretionary prisms. And the chain of islands do not form a curved shape, they instead form a straight line. And we can see that here when we look at the linear chain of islands associated with Hawaii. So we can see that these volcanic islands which form these linear chains are clearly forming by a different mechanism than the volcanic islands that form due to ocean-ocean convergent plate boundaries. So that's the first thing and distinction that we really have to make right from the start. So the question then becomes, how do we explain what we're seeing? Well, the explanation is due to what's called a hotspot. So this model suggests that in the mantle a big ball of magma forms, and that magma comes shooting up through the mantle in the form of what's called a mantle plume. And this mantle plume gets stuck at the base of the lithosphere. So the magma in the mantle plume essentially pools at the base of the lithosphere, and it just sits there and it doesn't move, it's stationary. Now, over time, the magma will slowly work its way through the lithosphere until it eventually makes its way onto the surface, at which point it will be erupted and it will form a volcano. Over time, your volcano or volcanoes will keep growing, they'll get bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually they may end up forming islands, and eventually those islands may become so large that they end up breaking sea levels, they end up above the water's surface. Now, the most important thing to remember is that the hotspot does not move. The crust that's going over the top of the hotspot, though, does move. And so this means that we have an active volcano here, but over time, the movement of the crust will slowly pull this island away from the hotspot. And as the island gets pulled away from the hotspot, it loses its source of magma, and the volcanoes eventually become dormant and then eventually become extinct. They stop erupting. And so we can see that here for these islands. We can see that they are now away from the source of magma, so they are no longer volcanically active. Another thing that we notice is that as the islands move away from the source, they typically become less buoyant, and so they will often begin to sink. And as they sink, they will typically find themselves dropping below sea level. So the subsidence of the lithosphere as it moves away from the heat source over here causes the islands to sink down below sea level. Now, obviously, as this island gets moved away, a new island will start forming. And so over time, the volcanoes that begin to form once this island has moved off will keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they will eventually form a volcanically active island. And then that island will then be transported away on the crust, and a new island will start forming. And so you can see, if we look at the diagram here, we can see this is where our hotspot is located now under Big Island. And over time, Big Island is going to steadily move off to the northwest. Now, the great thing about this is we know where the hotspot is currently located and where it's always been located. It's always been located under this position. Now, we know therefore that these islands out here must therefore once upon a time have been here. And over time, due to crustal movement, they've been transported off to the northwest. So we know where the rock started. We know where it is, and so we can quite easily get the distance. And then all we need to do is we need to get a sample of the rock from this seamount over here, date it in the lab, and then once again we have ourselves a distance, we have a time, and so we have distance over time gives us rate. And so we can also use linear island chains to see the rate at which the crust is moving, and this works for both continents and the ocean. So of course this example is using a hotspot located under oceanic crust, but we can also do the same thing for continental crust. The classic example is Yellowstone. So underneath Yellowstone there is also a hotspot, and we know that the rocks associated with the volcanism from that hotspot are to the southwest of Yellowstone, and so they form a trend that goes approximately southwest, and so we can just move along that trend. We can date the rocks, we know where the hotspot is because it's currently under Yellowstone National Park, we know how long it took the rocks to get to their current location, so once again we get distance, we get time, we can calculate the rate at which the North American plate is moving. And so these linear island chains are extremely helpful because once again they show us the plates are moving due to the formation of this linear chain of islands, but they also give us dating evidence that we can use to calculate the rate at which the crust is actually moving. So to finish, let's think about why South America is lopsided. So we've already discussed this, but we're just going to cover it one more time just to really think about what's going on. So as we've already discussed, South America has two distinct margins to it. We have the active western margin and the passive eastern margin. So we can see that the western margin is of course marked out by the formation of the Andes Mountains. We can also see there is an associated trench. We know the Andes Mountains are volcanically active, and we know they are active in terms of earthquakes as well. In contrast, over here on the eastern side of South America, we know geologically speaking conditions are relatively quiet. There's no volcanism, there are no major earthquakes, and obviously as you can see there's no mountain range. You can see instead we have a nice stable continental shelf, And of course the continental shelf is where we have areas of continental crust that are covered by shallow bodies of seawater, typically 0 to 200 meters in depth. So along these margins, what have we got? We have mostly passive sedimentary processes taking place, so we typically have lots of deposition of sediment and also a bit of erosion. So you can see there's a very distinct difference between these two regimes. So if we were to take a cross section, this is what we would see. So if I'm taking a cross section along this red dashed line here, this is what I would see. So we know we have South America here, and we know South America is of course going to be made of continental crust, so we know the crust is going to be relatively thick compared to the oceanic crust either side. Now we also can see we have a trench here, and we know that trenches are associated with convergent plate boundaries. We can also see it's a convergent plate boundary because we have the formation of a mountain range, which is the result of crustal deformation of the continental crust, and we know that this mountain range is volcanically active, so once again that's another hint at subduction to produce the magma required to feed the volcanoes. And obviously all the earthquake activity is the result of the stresses that build up as two very large pieces of crust try to move past each other. There's a lot of stress, a lot of energy involved in that process. So we know that the western side of South America is therefore a convergent plate boundary, and we know it's an ocean continent convergent plate boundary, and that therefore means that this piece of oceanic crust over here, the Nazca plate, must therefore be subducting down underneath the South American plate in an easterly direction. In terms of the eastern side of South America, well, what do we have going on here? Well, in this case, we don't have an active margin. We can see that the oceanic floor, the sea floor of the South Atlantic, is joined to the continental crust of South America, but we can see that there is no subduction zone. And the movement that we can see taking place is a result of ridge push from the Mid-Atlantic ridge here, and also the movement allowed by the subduction of the Nazca plate over here. So as we create new oceanic crust here along the Mid-Atlantic ridge, it pushes the old crust laterally away. As the old crust, as the oceanic crust is attached to the continental crust here, that means it's also pushing the continental crust of South America in a westerly direction. And as South America moves in the westerly direction, it must therefore ride over the top of the Nazca plate over here. So the Nazca plate must therefore subduct down underneath the South American plate. Now, because there's no subduction going on along this margin of South America, along the east coast, we can see that it's pretty geologically passive. We get sediment deposition, sediment erosion, that's about it. Relatively quiet from a geologic point of view. And so obviously the eastern margin is our passive margin, and the western margin is going to be our active margin. So remember those terms because they are going to come up quite a lot in geology, especially if you end up deciding to take the second course in geology, which is historical geology. Okay, thank you for watching the video, everybody, and have a good day.